Hello friends, welcome to my YouTube channel. Today I'm going to talk about an amazing book named Man's Search for Meaning. This book is one of the classic psychiatric texts available to the readers. It is a timeless formula for survival. It is written by a prominent Viennese psychiatrist before the war, Viktor Frankl, in which he has vividly mentioned all the experiences that both he and others in Auschwitz concentration camp coped or didn't with. A gem of a dramatic narrative focused upon the deepest of human problems. The greatly valuable life lessons are the biggest takeaways of this book. The author keeps reiterating the fact that we always have a choice in our lives. He goes on to emphasize that everything can be taken away from us except the ability to choose our attitude in any given set of circumstances. What we become is the result of an inner decision and not only the external influences around us. Frankl came to believe that man's deepest desire is to search for meaning and purpose. Like so many German and East European Jews, Frankl was cast into the Nazi network of concentration and extermination camps. But his account in this book is less about his travails, what he suffered and lost, than it is about the sources of his strength to survive. There are many valuable life lessons in this book, which can be actually life-changing for the readers. Here, I'm presenting the top 25 from them. Lesson number 1. Victor keeps reiterating these words. He who has a why to live for can bear almost any how. He describes about the prisoners who gave up on life, who had lost all hope for a future and were inevitably the first to die. So if you have found the purpose of your life, which is apparently different for different person, you'll find the ways to fulfill that purpose or achieve that goal. Life is not primarily a quest for pleasure or a quest for power, but a quest for meaning. The great task for any person is to find meaning in his or her life. So find the meaning in your life. And you see, life is meaningful, and that we must learn to see life as meaningful despite our circumstances. It emphasizes that there is an ultimate purpose to life. Life holds a potential meaning under any condition, even the most miserable ones. Once an individual's search for a meaning is successful, it not only renders him happy but also gives him the capability to cope with suffering. Man's search for meaning is the primary motivation in his life and not a secondary rationalization of instinctual drives. This meaning is unique and specific in that it must and can be fulfilled by him alone. Only then does it achieve a significance which will satisfy his own will to meaning. Lesson number 2. Sometimes it happens that people undergo the phase of life where they are in an existential vacuum. There is this feeling of the total and ultimate meaninglessness of their lives. They lack the awareness of a meaning worth living for. They are haunted by the experience of their inner emptiness, a void within themselves. No instinct tells him what he has to do, and no tradition tells him what he ought to do. Sometimes he does not even know what he wishes to do. Instead, he either wishes to do what other people do, that is, conformism, or he does what other people wish him to do, that is, totalitarianism. What matters, therefore, is not the meaning of life in general, but rather the specific meaning of a person's life at a given moment. To put the question in general terms would be comparable to the question posed to a chess champion. Tell me, master, what is the best move in the world? There simply is no such thing as the best or even a good move apart from a particular situation in a game and the particular personality of one's opponent. The same holds for human existence. One should not search for an abstract meaning of life. Ultimately, man should not ask what the meaning of his life is, but rather he must recognize that it is he who is asked. In a word, each man is questioned by life, and he can only answer to life by answering for his own life. To life, he can only respond by being responsible. Live as if you were living already for the second time, and as if you had acted the first time as wrongly as you are about to act now. Lesson number 3. Existential vacuum in extreme cases also results in suicides. Existential vacuum, a feeling of emptiness and meaninglessness. It means people have enough to live by, but nothing to live for. They have the means, but no meaning. Some do not even have the means, for example, the jobless people. Being jobless is equated with being useless, and being useless is equated with having a meaningless life. Insofar as the feeling of meaninglessness is concerned, however, we should not overlook and forget that per se. It's not a matter of pathology. Rather than being the sign and symptom of a neurosis, it is, I would say, the proof of one's humanness. This meaninglessness eventually leads to cases of suicides. Well, an individual's impulse to take his life would have been overcome had he been aware of some meaning and purpose worth living for. There is a solution to this problem. Who can guarantee that in your case it will not happen one day, sooner or later? But in the first place, you have to live to see the day on which it may happen. So you have to survive in order to see that day down. And from now on, the responsibility for survival does not leave you. For instance, consider a movie. It consists of thousands upon thousands of individual pictures, and each of them makes sense and carries a meaning. Yet, the meaning of the whole film cannot be seen before its last sequence is shown. However, we cannot understand the whole film without having first understood each of its components, each of the individual pictures. Isn't it the same with life? Doesn't the final meaning of life too reveal itself, if at all, only at its end, on the verge of death? And doesn't this final meaning too depend on whether or not the potential meaning of each single situation has been actualized to the best of the respective individual's knowledge and belief? Lesson number 4. Frankl saw 3 possible sources for meaning. In work means doing something significant. In love means caring for another person, as Frankl held on to the image of his wife through the darkest days in Auschwitz, and in courage in difficult times. You see, suffering in and of itself is meaningless. We give our suffering meaning by the way in which we respond to it. He writes that at one point a person may remain brave, dignified and unselfish, or in the bitter fight for self-preservation, he may forget his human dignity and become no more than an animal. Lesson number 5. Forces beyond your control can take away everything you possess except one thing: your freedom to choose how you will respond to the situation. You cannot control what happens to you in life, but you can always control what you will feel and do about what happens to you. Lesson number 6. The man whose self-esteem had always depended on the respect of others is emotionally destroyed. We are never left with nothing as long as we retain the freedom to choose how we will respond. Lesson number 7. Don't aim at success. The more you aim at it and make it a target, the more you're going to miss it. For success, like happiness cannot be pursued, it must ensue, and it only does so as the unintended side effect of one's dedication to a cause greater than oneself, or as the byproduct of one's surrender to a person other than oneself. Happiness must happen, and the same holds for success. You have to let it happen by not caring about it. Lesson number 8. The attempt to develop a sense of humor and to see things in a humorous light is some kind of a trick learned while mastering the art of living. Suffering completely fills the human soul and conscious mind, no matter whether the suffering is great or little. Lesson number 9. Everything can be taken from a man, but one thing, the last of the human freedoms: to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances, to choose one's own way. There are always choices to make. Every day, every hour offers the opportunity to make a decision which determines whether you will or you will not submit to those powers which threaten to rob you of your very self, your inner freedom, which determines whether or not you will become the plaything of circumstance, renouncing freedom and dignity to become molded into the form of the typical inmate. Only the men who allow their inner hold on their moral and spiritual selves to subside eventually fall victim to the external influences. When in distress, try to force your thoughts to turn to another subject. By this method, you will succeed in rising above the situation, above the sufferings of the moment. Those who lose faith in the future, his future gets doomed. With the loss of belief in the future, he also lost his spiritual hold. He let himself decline and became subject to mental and physical decay. So it's all about attitude. Change the way how you see things and you'll do great. Lesson number 10. Life ultimately means taking the responsibility to find the right answer to its problems and to fulfill the tasks which it constantly sets for each individual. These tasks, and therefore the meaning of life, differ from man to man and from moment to moment. Thus, it is impossible to define the meaning of life in a general way. Questions about the meaning of life can never be answered by sweeping statements. Life does not mean something vague, but something very real and concrete, just as life's tasks are also very real and concrete. They form man's destiny, which is different and unique for each individual. No man and no destiny can be compared with any other man or any other destiny. When a man finds that it is his destiny to suffer, he will have to accept his suffering as his task, his single and unique task. He will have to acknowledge the fact that even in suffering, he is unique and alone in the universe. No one can relieve him of his suffering or suffer in his place. His unique opportunity lies in the way in which he bears his burden. This uniqueness and singleness, which distinguishes each individual and gives a meaning to his existence, has a bearing on creative work as much as it does on human love. When the impossibility of replacing a person is realized, it allows the responsibility which a man has for his existence and its continuance to appear in all its magnitude. A man who becomes conscious of the responsibility he bears toward a human being who affectionately waits for him, or to an unfinished work, will never be able to throw away his life. He knows the why for his existence and will be able to bear almost any how. Lesson number 11. No situation repeats itself, and each situation calls for a different response. Sometimes the situation in which a man finds himself may require him to shape his own fate by action. At other times, it is more advantageous for him to make use of an opportunity for contemplation and to realize assets in this way. Sometimes, man may be required simply to accept fate, to bear his cross. Every situation is distinguished by its uniqueness, and there is always one right answer to the problem posed by the situation at hand. Lesson number 12. What you have experienced, no power on earth can take from you. Not only your experiences, but all you have done, whatever great thoughts you may have had, and all you have suffered, all this is not lost, though it is past. You brought it into being. Having been is also a kind of being, and perhaps the surest kind. Human life, under any circumstances, never ceases to have a meaning, and that this infinite meaning of life includes suffering and dying, privation and death. It was in the nature of this sacrifice that it should appear to be pointless in the normal world, the world of material success, but in reality our sacrifice did have a meaning. Lesson number 13. Suffering may well be a human achievement, especially if the suffering grows out of existential frustration. A man's concern, even his despair, over the worthwhileness of life is an existential distress, but by no means a mental disease. Lesson number 14. The true meaning of life is to be discovered in the world rather than within man or his own psyche, as though it were a closed system. This is termed in the book as the self-transcendence of human existence. The more one forgets himself by giving himself to a cause to serve or another person to love, the more human he is and the more he actualizes himself. What is called self-actualization is not an attainable aim at all, for the simple reason that the more one would strive for it, the more he would miss it. In other words, self-actualization is possible only as a side effect of self-transcendence. Lesson number 15. The meaning of life always changes, but that it never ceases to be. We can discover this meaning in life in three different ways. First, by the way of achievement or accomplishment. Second, by experiencing something such as goodness, truth and beauty, by experiencing nature and culture, or last but not least, by experiencing another human being in his very uniqueness, by loving him, and third, by the attitude we take toward unavoidable suffering. We may also find meaning in life even when confronted with a hopeless situation, when facing a fate that cannot be changed. We can challenge human potential at its best. which is to transform a personal tragedy into a triumph, to turn one's predicament into a human achievement. When we are no longer able to change a situation, just think of an incurable disease such as inoperable cancer. We are challenged to change ourselves. Suffering ceases to be suffering at the moment it finds a meaning, such as the meaning of a sacrifice. At times, we need to change our attitude toward the unalterable fate. Man's main concern is not to gain pleasure or to avoid pain, but rather to see a meaning in his life. However, in no way is suffering necessary to find meaning. Meaning is possible even in spite of suffering, provided the suffering is unavoidable. If it were avoidable, however, the meaningful thing to do would be to remove its cause, be it psychological, biological, or political. To suffer unnecessarily is masochistic rather than heroic. What we need to understand is that suffering is unavoidable. In accepting this challenge to suffer bravely, life has a meaning up to the last moment, and it retains this meaning literally to the end. Lesson number 16. The meaning of love. You see, love is the only way to grasp another human being in the innermost core of his personality. No one can become fully aware of the very essence of another human being unless he loves him. By his love, he is enabled to see the essential traits and features in the beloved person. And even more, he sees that which is potential in him, which is not yet actualized, but yet ought to be actualized. Furthermore, by his love, the loving person enables the beloved person to actualize these potentialities. By making him aware of what he can be and of what he should become, he makes these potentialities come true. Lesson number 17. The transitoriness of our existence in no way makes it meaningless, but it does constitute our responsibleness. For everything hinges upon our realizing the essentially transitory possibilities. Man constantly makes his choice concerning the mass of present potentialities. Which of these will be condemned to non-being and which will be actualized? At any moment, man must decide, for better or for worse, what will be the monument of his existence. The transitoriness of our lives is a reminder that challenges us to make the most of every moment of our lives. The irreversibility of our lives should motivate us grab every opportunity to act on all the potentialities to fulfill a meaning in our lives. Lesson number 18. The pessimist resembles a man who observes with fear and sadness that his wall calendar, from which he daily tears a sheet, grows thinner with each passing day. On the other hand, the person who attacks the problems of life actively is like a man who removes each successive leaf from his calendar and files it neatly and carefully away with its predecessors, after first having jotted down a few diary notes on the back. He can reflect with pride and joy on all the richness set down in these notes, on all the life he has already lived to the fullest. Lesson number 19. We need to amend the saying, "The wish is father to the thought," to "the fear is the mother of the event." The author has mentioned few psychological concepts in the book, like hyper-intention, hyper-reflection, and paradoxical intention. So I'll explain each concept in brief. Hyper-intention. Hyperintention is a forced intention which makes impossible what one forcibly wishes. For instance, the more a man tries to demonstrate his sexual potency, let's say, or a woman her ability to experience the orgasm, the less they are able to succeed. Pleasure is and must remain a side effect or byproduct and is destroyed and spoiled to the degree to which it is made a goal in itself. Then hyper-reflection. Hyper-reflection is also pathogenic. Don't live constantly with a fearful expectation of the toll which your traumatic experience would someday take. This anticipatory anxiety results in incapacitating the person towards attainment of goals. Then there is the solution to these two problems, that is paradoxical intention. That is, you are invited to intend, even if only for a moment, precisely that which you fear. This helps in resolving deliberately the issue of anticipatory anxiety. This procedure consists of a reversal of the person's attitude, inasmuch as his fear is replaced by a paradoxical wish. By this treatment, the wind is taken out of the sails of the anxiety. It lends itself as a useful tool in treating obsessive, compulsive, and phobic conditions, especially in cases with underlying anticipatory anxiety. Lesson number 20. The tragic triad. One should remain optimistic in spite of the tragic triad of human life, that is pain, guilt, and death. Say yes to life in spite of everything. Life is potentially meaningful under any condition, even those which are most miserable, and this in turn presupposes the human capacity to creatively turn life's negative aspects into something positive or constructive. In other words, what matters is to make the best of any given situation. Lesson number 21. Optimism. Optimism is not anything to be commanded or ordered. One cannot even force oneself to be optimistic indiscriminately, against all odds, against all hope, exactly the way the happiness cannot be pursued. It must ensue. One must have a reason to be happy. Once the reason is found, however, one becomes happy automatically. As we see, a human being is not one in pursuit of happiness, but rather in search of a reason to become happy. Last but not least, through actualizing the potential meaning inherent and dormant in a given situation. If you want anyone to laugh, let's say, you have to provide him with a reason. Example, you have to tell him a joke. In no way is it possible to evoke real laughter by urging him, or having him urge himself to laugh. Doing so would be the same as urging people posed in front of a camera to say cheese, only to find that in the finished photographs their faces are frozen in artificial smiles. Lesson number 22. How does a human being go about finding meaning? All we can do is study the lives of people who seem to have found their answers to the questions of what ultimately human life is about, as against those who have not. Conscience can act as a prompter, which, if need be, indicates the direction in which we have to move in a given life situation. In order to carry out such a task, conscience must apply a measuring stick to the situation one is confronted with, and this situation has to be evaluated in the light of a set of criteria, in the light of a hierarchy of values. These values, however, cannot be espoused and adopted by us on a conscious level. They are something that we are. Lesson number 23. There are three avenues on which one arrives at meaning in life. First, by creating a work or by doing a deed. Don't sit idle, act, and act with full responsibility. Second, by experiencing something, let's say love or encountering someone, experiencing can be as valuable as achieving because it compensates for our one-sided emphasis on the external world of achievement at the expense of the internal world of experience. Third, by turning a tragedy into triumph. Even the helpless victim of a hopeless situation, facing a fate he cannot change, may rise above himself, may grow beyond himself, and by so doing, change himself. It's not that suffering is indispensable to the discovery of meaning. Meaning can be found in spite of suffering. But if the suffering is avoidable, the meaningful thing to do is to remove its cause. And if one cannot remove the cause, he can still choose his attitude. Lesson number 24. There is no reason to pity old people. Instead, young people should envy them. It is true that the old people have no opportunities, no possibilities in the future, but they have more than that. Instead of possibilities in the future, they have realities in the past, the potentialities they have actualized, the meanings they have fulfilled, the values they have realized, and nothing and nobody can ever remove these assets from the past. Lesson number 25. Life remains potentially meaningful under any condition, even those which are most miserable. So too does the value of each and every person stay with him or her. But unfortunately, this usefulness is usually defined in terms of functioning for the benefit of society. Today's society is characterized by achievement orientation, and consequently it adores people who are successful and happy, and in particular it adores the young. People blur the decisive difference between being valuable in the sense of dignity and being valuable in the sense of usefulness. So this was all. Thanks for watching the video. If you find it really meaningful and helpful, then please share the video. See you in the next video. Thank you so much.